The master economist must possess a rare combination of gifts. He must be mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher in some degree. He must understand symbols and speak in words. He must contemplate the particular in terms of the general and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. He must study the present in the light of the past for the purpose of the future. No part of man's nature or his institutions must be entirely outside of his regard. He must be purposeful and disinterested in a simultaneous mood, as aloof and incorruptible as an artist, yet sometimes as near to earth as a politician. That was John Maynard Keynes. Some big words in there.
Who?
Who? John Maynard Keynes, the most influential. Well, that quote I used to, when I would at Catholic U, like help at admissions or recruiting events for the econ department, they would say like, well, what is an economist or what is economics? And I would recite that quote.
You would just rattle that off from memory.
I paraphrased. I used the beginning and then the first sentence and the last sentence. I cut out some of the middle stuff because that's a lot longer than I remember it. But yeah, because that's economics as a discipline is a mix of, there's a lot more math than I think I realized when I took that as a major, a lot more calculus. But yeah, and also there's obviously a philosophical element in looking at history and politics. And so that's why I looked at as like mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher, right? Like if you are interested in all four of those categories and have affinity or capability, then like economics might be the field for you to study. But John Maynard Keynes, he's like the economist, not to be confused with the newspaper that's got the same title.
Is it a newspaper or a magazine?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, File Sir. It's a magazine, but they call themselves a newspaper. And so
that makes
if
me
you
angry.
want to show... Yes, if you want to... And also I have some calls with The Economist, so we don't have to get into that too much now. But yes, so if you're really inside scoop, you call it a newspaper, even though it's a magazine.
I guess it is paper that has news on it. Like what qualifies? What's the difference? What's the distinction?
Well, I would say, having just gone to the United States Postal Service Museum, is that
as one normally does.
As one does, is a flat is what a magazine is, and a newspaper I would say is well, I guess that's a good question. I don't know where they put newspapers because there's cards and letters, and then there's flats, which is like magazines and catalogs, and then there's parcels, which is like boxes. So I don't know where newspapers fits in. Maybe they are flats. Maybe they are the same. But it's newspapers printed on newspaper paper, right? Like that kind of
the recycled gray stuff.
The recycled gray stuff, yes. Which Financial Times is bleached tan, and they actually pay more now because that's their trademark color. Which Financial Times is like the Wall Street Journal of Britain, and I always have qualms with them, but I have qualms with everybody.
There could be I would say a whole episode, but there might be like a whole series of things that really grind our gears.
Exactly. But we're here to talk about John Maynard Keynes, who also does grind my gears in some ways. But
JMK.
John K. JMK. I don't know if that's what he was. Yeah, freely just you say Keynes, even though it's spelled like Keynes, Keynes. But he was born in 1883. He died in 1946. And he's the founder of Keynesian economics. So I think that like anyone who took an econ class, you maybe didn't know this, but you probably taught like Keynesian economic philosophy.
So what is Keynesian economic philosophy?
Keynesian economic philosophy is a belief that fiscal policy can help moderate the animal spirits, right? And so, among other things, I've got the Wikipedia page up here so I don't misquote anything too harshly about him, because I did read his big book was he wrote in 1936, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, just called The General Theory, which I read. Significant general theory, no, like the general theory, which I remember reading, and it's very technical. And so he focuses on the demand side of the supply and demand equation. So the people, the consumers, and how they react to different things, which he calls the animal spirits, right? And so the original quote, how he defines animal spirits here: even apart from the instability due to speculation, there is the instability due to the characteristic of human nature that a large proportion of our positive activities depend on spontaneous optimism rather than on mathematical expectation, whether moral or hedonistic or economic. Most, probably, of our decisions to do something positive, the full consequences of which will be drawn over many days to come, can only be taken as a result of animal spirits, of a spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, and not as the outcome of a weighted average of quantitative benefits multiplied by quantitative probabilities. So kind of like, emotion and it's like, people get scared and sell their investments, or they get excited and they
So
throw all their money in on
so
stuff.
he
Yeah.
supports my idea that you loathe, that the economy is just based on feeling.
Well, it's not just based on physics, because it's also based on the ability to extract resources and to produce, and there's a lot of things. But the economy is not one thing; it is many things, and people's emotional reaction to things. Like you saw, there was a headline in a Substack article, and it was like written as like a memo from the future about AI, and it was really pessimistic. And there was a huge sell-off that day, right? And result of that article, because it was put out by a very reputable research firm. So yeah, you can kind of see, because right, the stock market's constantly trying to price in all the possible situations, and so bad headlines and actually, I saw an interesting Instagram reel a couple days ago where it talked about how there was so much forecast for a recession and then it never happened in the last, like, 6, 12 months. And the theory they were saying is that actually there was going to be a recession, but because everybody thought there was going to be a recession, there wasn't a recession. Does that make sense? Like the economic trajectory was heading that way, but all of a sudden it's like you're going into a storm, and if everyone's like, all the ships will sink in the storm. It's like, well, we know we're going into a storm. Let's batten down the hatches. Let's prepare. Let's, streamline our processes, find some efficiencies, manage our risks.
So in 2008, was it
Yeah.
that like nobody saw it coming? Because there's this few guys in The Big Short who short the economy, but for the large part, was it just something that was going unnoticed?
I think, yeah, there are people calling out for it. I think there's a lot of money being made and a lot of reliance on rating agencies of relating the portfolios of these subprime mortgages and saying that they were stronger than they were. Um, and so I think they were looking at and saying, wait a minute, the fundamentals here don't suggest, like, I think people were relying too much on assumptions rather than the actual data, and the likelihood of defaults. And then a lot of these banks were, yeah, not diversified enough. And so I think, yeah, but there's a line in the opening of Succession that everyone makes it seem so obvious. I think he uses some more colorful language, but makes it seem so obvious in retrospect, right? It's like, oh yeah, we should have known that. But at the same time, there was a lot of reason and information going into this. And I heard a good analogy from a friend of mine who said that, like, every economic crisis, it's like the hole in a dike, like in the Netherlands. Isn't it like a fable or something where like the boy sticks his finger in the hole to plug the dike from leaking? And it's like, well, we know what the last crisis was, so we fix that, but then the next crisis is going to be something else. It's what we're not thinking about, and that's why it becomes a crisis, because we rely on certain things or don't think certain things will happen, and they do, and therefore we're not prepared for it. So does that kind of help
It
explain?
sounds like a convincing parable that I'm gonna have to look up later.
Yes, but the whole point is that like everyone's like, if you plug the hole in the dike, like that's safe, but then the other part is, yeah. So. But Keynes' big thing, right? So he influenced a lot of how governments respond in crises, right? To your point, so there was the Great Recession in 2000, 2009, where the government bailed out certain financial institutions. And then we saw in COVID, right, the stimulus checks that went out, and also the other stimulus spending that was done. And right, so in the government can intervene in the economy in many ways, but the two principal ways are monetary policy and fiscal policy. And I think on our Milton Friedman episode, we talked a lot about monetary policy, so controlling interest rates, the money supply, really kind of the feeding into the financial system, and not recognizing that the financial system is kind of like the nervous system. Not nervous as in we're nervous, but like the nervous system is in your brain controlling your body parts. And so it's like, if we can control that, the rest of the body will figure itself out. And I would say which organ is a correlation to fiscal policy. Set myself up for an analogy that's not going to make sense.
Circulatory
It's
system.
like circulatory. Yeah, it's kind of like getting a blood transfusion. Maybe that's the way to think about it, right?
Oh, yeah, I
Yes.
got something.
Look at that. You got, yeah.
I'm starting to understand the economy.
Because the economy, yeah. So because when you fiscal policy, right, is how the government taxes and spends, and so Keynes believed in a crisis you have to spur demand, right? Because basically everyone gets nervous in a panic and they're all holding their dollars and they're not spending them. And so that's a problem. And so in monetary policy recognizes this too. And so that's why they lower interest rates and encourage being able to use the bank institutions to accelerate loan lending, which then accelerates economic activity, right? So if it's cheaper, if you're getting 20% interest rate in a bank, which is really high, you're going to keep your money there. But if you're getting nothing, like 1%, 2%, you're like, well, I might as well invest it, right? And so that's a way to spur it.
Maybe this is.
And also by having lower interest rates. Oh, sorry.
I have a tangential question. I know that's not the other show on Veritas. Um, uh, and I don't know if this is the form to ask it. So, but like, what is like a high yield savings account? Like that rate of interest or whatever it is. How do they determine that, and how can that, like, what makes that distinct from just a regular savings account where you get like 1%, 2%?
Yeah, so a high yield savings account, there's more strings attached. So like you have your checking account, which has no interest rates, and you can add and withdraw at your heart's content. Then you have a savings account, which, and I don't want to get this wrong if there's anyone who's actually involved with banking, but there's a certain amount of times you can withdraw from a savings account,
Right.
right, in a month without incurring a penalty. And what that does is the bank uses those to, like, in fractional reserve banking, a bank will lend out the savings, the cat, like I put in $100. It's not going to just put $100 in a little lock and say, all right, when Charles comes back, he's going to get $100. They say, all right, we're going to lend out $90 because Charles never takes out his $100. He just takes out $5 at a time and then puts in $5, takes out five, puts in five. And so they lend it out, and then that person gets $90 in a loan, and then they put that in the bank because they're not going to spend it all at once. And then they lend out $80 of the 90. And so they have this multiple, like it's creating money, right, effectively. And so the Fed does a lot with banking regulations. I mean, the Treasury Department does too. And so a high yield savings account is like a savings account, but it has a higher yield. So that's it. But no, it's just as a higher rate.
But
But it
how?
also means, yeah, but how? But no, the bank pays you more interest, but they have rules. They have more rules. And they may say, like a certificate of deposit, you cannot withdraw this money for 6 months, like at all. And so, yes, you'll earn 12% interest, but that gives the bank the guarantee that they don't have to, keep as much. Yes, and so they have that as a mechanism. So certificate of deposit, high yield savings account, and high yield savings account. So there's a spectrums of kind of different ways to earn money. And I think we've been unusually low interest rates, particularly up until COVID. Where, like, I mean, you hear in the 70s where interest rates were much higher. Like, I don't want to say the number because I'll get it wrong, but it was significant. You could make a nice little chunk of change from your savings, right, sitting in a savings account. In the U.S., it's kind of like today, it's really not. You'll get 1 or 2%, right? So that's quite small, and you're better off putting it in something else. And then, so the monetary policy. The Fed sets the interbank lending rate, which is kind of the floor. This is like the base lending rate between banks. And so banks have to charge that amount, and then they charge above it, right, various amounts. And so if they lower the rate, then the bank can lower its rates in turn, right? And if the Federal Reserve raises its rates, it increases it. And then they also buy treasury bonds to increase the money supply, and they issue. There's a lot of things the Fed can do, but that's not Keynes' main thing. Keynes' main thing is the fiscal policy, though, which is the other side of the coin, which is taxing and spending. So he believes in a crisis, the problem isn't that businesses aren't doing enough; it's that consumers aren't buying enough. And so he thinks, right, everyone's afraid, they're leaving their money in their savings account. They've lowered interest rates, but they're still like, you know what? It's risky out there. I'm not going to go buy a new Carhartt vest, which Father Lamitz is wearing, because I might need that money, if I lose my job, or, and so people are scared to spend their money in the aggregate. And so he says the government should do deficit spending, which is either lower taxes or increase spending or both, to kind of prime the pump, right? And so that way the government takes on more debt, and by extension, I guess, creates money, because it's inflationary, which we'll get to in a minute. But so the government will spend money, and so you saw this in like the Great Depression, where the Franklin Roosevelt, four terms too many, he created a lot of temporary government organizations to spend money. And so you had like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which my great-grandfather was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they were like helping build national parks and cleaning up federal land. And what they would do is they would pay the workers to do that. And then that way the workers get money, and now the workers go and buy pasties, which is an Upper Peninsula food, which is very good. Or it's like a little folded over kind of like pastry meat thing. It's when we go to Mackinac Island sometime, you'll see
I
it.
wish I had a better
Um,
name. Pasties.
Pasties. It comes from like a like Cornish pasties, right? Like it's an English food. But anyway, yeah, but and you make money, you go and you spend it, and then okay, that now you're buying pasties, and that's paying a waiter and a pasty shop, and so then they can go, and so it kicks off a vicious cycle um, of consumption, which therefore revives the economy. And then Keynes would believe that you, in the same way that the Federal Reserve raises interest rates in times of prosperity, that the Keynesians believe that you, in theory, should then cut your spending once you're in the good times. But as Milton Friedman said, there's no such thing as a temporary government program because there's a lot of agencies in Washington, D.C., some of these beautiful marble buildings. I was like, what Caesar Augustus said, I found a city of brick and left a city of marble. I think Franklin Roosevelt could say that too, because a lot of buildings in D.C. were built under his administration, part of this, and they housed government agencies that were meant to be temporary stimulus efforts, and people liked what they were doing and liked that they were having these positive externalities or supporting different industries. And here we are, almost a century after the Great Depression, and they're still alive and well and pumping, money into the economy. And so that was Keynes' big push, was recognizing that fiscal policy can stimulate. And so I don't think he's entirely wrong because it does increase economic activity. I think the challenge is, A, is it the most effective because the U.S. government has had a deficit for most of its entirety, and we are now $38 trillion in debt as a result, which is quite high. And we're now spending more to service. These are the challenges, and this came up during COVID in a lot of emerging markets, is that the more a government borrows, it has to pay to borrow, right? So it's treasury, the government issues treasury notes, they have to pay interest on them. And once the treasury note, you have to pay for your debt. So we're paying for the $38 trillion debt. And if all of a sudden the economy is getting too hot, right, and we have to raise interest rates, you can kind of paint yourself into a corner because now you are paying more to service the debt that you had previously. And so it kind of becomes a vicious cycle of how to get out of it. And so, yeah, it's a bit dangerous. Does that make sense? Did I just go down like a really deep econ rabbit hole that makes me happy, but kind of bores everyone else?
No, I think I'm tracking with you. One thing that I'm just trying to, has been in the back of my mind as you're talking is just like this idea of like trying to change or influence human behavior and like spending habits and consumerism. It sounds like it's really just focused on interest rates and price or and job availability, right? Like getting people money. But is that like the primary way of changing human behavior politically speaking, or are there like other economic factors that can influence how people
Yeah.
act?
So I guess so there's regulation, right? And so the government can ban certain things, outlaw certain things. Tax is a big part of also, right? Like we tax things we don't like. Or Milton Friedman said, the government, if something's moving, it taxes it. If it's not moving, it subsidizes it. Uh,
That's a good line.
and yeah, he's got a lot of good one-liners. We're making this Milton Friedman 2.0. We were supposed to talk about Keynes. But yes, so the government taxes, which in theory there's like a sin tax, right, where we tax alcohol and tobacco and things that we don't want people spending money on. So we raise the price, and therefore hopefully people find substitutes that are cheaper, like you can chew gum instead of smoking. Or there's a bigger cost, like, you know what, I don't like spending however much I spend on cigarettes. I'm now going to quit, right? Like it makes a tangible economic cost. But then we tax things that we like profits and income. So the government can do that. And then the government can regulate, the government can ban certain things or protect certain industries. It can create barriers to entry by saying like, hey, like I just got my hair cut 20 minutes ago. And it could say to be a barber, you have to pass this licensing exam and you have to do all these certain things. And that makes it harder to become a barber because you have to do certain things to become a barber. It's just like, I just show up with a pair of scissors and say, I can cut your hair. So Hong Kong had very minimal government intervention initially. And that really spurred a lot of economic activity because you could just be like a barber. You could like sit on a bucket and say like, I'll cut your hair, $5. And so it created a lot of opportunity versus saying like, oh, you have to take a class and you got to do things. So like seminary, high barrier to entry to be priest, right? You can't just pop up on a street corner. Well, you can, but you wouldn't be really a valid or licit priest.
Excommunicated right away, I think.
Right away. Yes. So that's how, and then the government can do, yeah, a lot of things. The government can start companies and there's state-owned enterprises. And
Well, I think there are pros and cons
yeah,
to regulations. I mean, obviously, you want somebody to be a priest to be trained and to know what he's talking about. And all the reforms in the history of the church have always started with reforming the priests and how they're formed and everything, right? I get that. But you also like sometimes like I guess like maybe it's more subjective or it depends on like the thing or industry itself is like when do regulations become like too much? Like just like the red tape government bureaucracy of just like having to fill out all these forms and do all this paperwork and do all these things just to like get a business or even to build a house or something like that. It's just like um it like decentivizes certain things because it's regulated. Like, well, like how do you figure out? And maybe this is just like a ephemeral question. Like, how do you figure out where the bar of regulations is too high?
yeah. No, I think it's a tough one because that's what I think the housing market is going through right now. Because like permitting process, particularly in high cost of living areas, is very difficult and very onerous. And I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Again, any economist that tells you it's one thing that's causing the problem is probably lying because it's the economy is very complicated. But yeah, I think yeah. So like with housing, right? It's when you I look at it more from the supply side, hence supply side economics, which is if we want to lower the prices of housing, you have to have more houses. And so that's pretty easy. Like if
It
I
makes
have,
sense to me. That I understand.
yes, if you have like on your back shelf, you have one Dory plush toy. If there's only one Dory plush toy in the whole world, it's worth a lot, right? Because there's many people who would want that. Now, if there's 6 billion Dory plush toys and only like 1 billion people want them, then they're going to be dirt cheap because there's more demand, there's more supply chasing limited demand. And so I think the way that I would rather see regulation is focusing on the supply side by, oh, wait a minute, we're seeing something out of whack here. How do we fix it by making it easier for the economy and business and industry and individuals to solve the problem versus like the three most expensive and convoluted and complicated parts of our economy, right, is healthcare, housing, and education. And what are the three areas that have the most government involvement? It's healthcare, housing, and education. And so it's a function of like it can increase like so yeah the government recognizes that home ownership is a very valuable part of building net worth, right? Because property there's only so much land and you have a growing population and so houses become worth more over time, but almost to a detriment where they made it so easy to buy a home, but not easy to build a home. And so we have more people chasing fewer products. And then also, like with student loans, and they've done this study, I think it's for every dollar of government spending in higher ed, it increases tuition costs by 60 cents. So so which is like the opposite of what you want. Like you want to make it college more affordable, and it was for a lot of history. But then basically, like simplistically, it was $5,000 a year to go to college, and the government said we'll give you an interest-free loan or a very affordable loan for up to $5,000. Now there's people who before you had to have the cash, you had to borrow right from your friends, your family, or you had to work and you could spend the $5,000. And now everyone was kind of given like a credit card for $5,000, and there's more students entering the education market, and then therefore it increases your propensity to spend because now you have a $5,000 credit card. So you still can get the $5,000 from your parents, but you also have a $5,000 credit card. So now higher ed is going to cost $10,000 a year, right? And so you see that. There's a mix of things too. There's, I think, culturally, like here our parents when they went to like the dorms, they were a lot rougher, right? Didn't have air conditioning or all this stuff versus places we went were pretty nice. So there's been increases in costs and other things, and so yeah, I think it's a very complicated answer to I can't remember what your question was. But see,
I'm not sure if I remember it either.
I don't either. But I don't remember the question, but that was the answer. But Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, so he
JMK.
believed in JMK.
Friend of the
So he was
pod.
a fan of fiscal policy, friend of the podcast. But he was also instrumental in what was called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which I think we should do a live taping in Bretton Woods. It's in New Hampshire or Vermont. I always get them mixed up because they're next to each other. Bretton Woods. Have you been to Bretton Woods? Does it sound familiar to you?
No, Vermont
It's
is
in
on
New
the left, New
Hampshire.
Hampshire's on the right.
Wait, which one's on the left?
Vermont.
Okay. I'll remember that because Bernie Sanders
They
is on the
fit.
left and he's from
They
Vermont.
fit very, very nicely, like a
Yeah.
puzzle piece almost.
There's not like a no man's land in the middle, like other states. They all fit like puzzle pieces. They're poor.
That was in the seminary. One of our teachers would read to us this, not a priest, would read to us this book, Children's Letters to God. And one of the children's letters was, "Dear God, how do you know where to draw the lines for the borders?" I was like,
Well, they used to use rivers.
I was like, this kid is not
at the time.
prepared for a very philosophical and political answer about borders. And wait till they hear what happened after World War II.
Oh yeah, yeah. And drew some, yeah, because a lot of borders have been drawn and moved around, and yeah, especially in Europe, right? But like in the U.S., right, our borders are all straight lines when you go further west because they were drawn by map makers, not by population. Yeah, but so the Bretton Woods system in New Hampshire on the right of Vermont was after a conference in 1945 where the world powers got together towards the end of the war, and the Allied countries kind of set up a part of this, like you've heard the rules-based international order, and this is a big part of it from an economic perspective. And so they agreed on a set of criteria for what defines GDP versus inflation versus unemployment rates, et cetera, and like what statistics they're going to track. And then also it set up the World Bank and the IMF, which we could talk about the IMF also, because that's I remember I told you so. The IMF head is traditionally, let's see, sorry, World Bank. No, World Bank came out of it too. They came out in 1944. But it's part of the UN. Let me see, does it say? Yeah, the World Bank was established on the IMF at the Bretton Woods Conference. So, all right, I wasn't completely crazy. But traditionally, the Americans picked the leader of the World Bank and the Europeans picked the leader of the IMF. And the number 2 is picked by the opposite. So we were walking, a friend of mine, by the IMF headquarters. Said, "Can you please take a picture of me next to the sign in DC?" And I said, my dream job is to be the deputy or the assistant director of the IMF, which is the U.S. government's pick. And he said, no one has ever said that. They want that is their dream job. But I think it would be so cool.
Why?
So, why? Well, because the IMF, there's a adage, which isn't entirely true, is the IMF is more of a bank and the World Bank is more of a fund, because it's the opposite, International Monetary Fund versus the World Bank Group. But the IMF is like the bank, the lender of last resort for the world. And so basically, if your government is going through a fiscal crisis, you can call the IMF for a loan, and they will give you one, but they will have lots of strings attached. And so they'll say, okay, well, you have to do this and you can't do that. And they'll enforce austerity, which also, if I
That is
ever
your
have
dream.
a daughter, I'm going to name her Austerity. I know it is. It's like you get to tell. So there's lots of countries that have, there's a lot of people who hate the IMF because like, how dare you enforce austerity? I'm like, that's the point, is that they ran out of money, so they have to get help. And the IMF is saying, we will help you, but you have to do these things to get better. It's like a rehab. It's financial rehab for countries. They should make it a reality TV show. Wouldn't that be fun? Like IMF Live or
It's kind of just like following Dave Ramsey on social media.
yeah. I have $600,000 in debt. I make $2,000 a year, and I have 8 pickup trucks.
Sell the
right,
trucks.
Look at your Dave Ramsey impersonation. And there's the other guy, Caleb Hammers. Do you see him?
He's the one who sits down with people individually and like goes through their finances. Yeah, he's kind of he's aggressive at times.
He is. I do. Yeah. From he's not the most Christian in his presentation in terms of politeness or language. Versus Dave Ramsey is much more of that. But Caleb Hammers is from Michigan, of all places. But he's like a TikTok guy, and is his last name Hammers? I think it is. But I like it because he's kind of like pro free markets. And because you don't normally think like a TikTok star in his probably 20s, who's by rating people's finances would be pro free markets.
You love his reactions to people. It's like, you made how much money? No.
Yeah. It's like you shouldn't be going to Starbucks every day, right? But I guess it's tough love. Some people respond to that. I don't know why anyone would sign up to go on that show. Like if my finances were out of whack, I would not want to have the whole world know it.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yes. But so Keynes back at the Bretton Woods, right? IMF, World Bank came out of it. So that's why like a lot of economic statistics we say are standardized. And then we use GDP, right, as to how to measure the economies, gross domestic product. And I remember freshman year we had to memorize what the variables are that make it up, and I still remember it.
Shoot, let's test it out. Show the world.
You're going to remember this too because the first part, it's sig x minus m. So if you think that, all right, everybody, sig x minus m. So consumption, C, plus investment, I, plus government spending, plus exports minus imports, CIG x minus m, sig x minus m.
Those are all times each other?
No, they're addition subtraction. So
I was like,
multiply them all,
big money, and then subtraction just comes out of nowhere.
Yes, because it's basically right. Government. So consumption is what people spend, and so that's right. You know, I buy something, you buy something. Investment, how much we're investing in commerce in the markets. Exports, what you're producing and sending abroad, so it's being consumed by people outside of your country, minus imports. And so that's where you get like trade deficits, right? Exports minus imports. And so if you have imports more than your exports, you have a negative trade deficit. And that's a cost on GDP. But I'm not a huge worrier of trade deficits because, as Milton Friedman said, you know, how much do you export to the grocery store? Nothing. Well, you have a trade deficit with the grocery store. It's like, yeah, but you're still benefiting because you get food. So trade deficits aren't always bad. I'm not like a deficit. I know is a scary word, and so I think that's why a lot of people think, well, you're overly reliant. And yeah, maybe you don't want to have a whole economy that's entirely dependent on imports, but like Singapore is, and they have financial services, and then they import all their goods. So, but yeah, and I think it's a little false because government spending can increase your GDP. So if I want to grow an economy, I can just spend money to do so, right, as a government, and it increases the G in sig x minus m. So therefore, GDP, I spend $20 billion more, my economy grew by $20 billion. Well,
that's the one. That's the one quote I saw or about Keynes is that he was pro government spending money they did not have.
Yes, but there's another kind of said we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like, which is
that's how I live my life.
That's how you live your life. Go there another day. Yeah, so deficit spending, right? Yeah, so borrowing money to support, because at the end of the day, like the accounts have to balance. The money has to come from somewhere. You could truly, like, there's governments like Zimbabwe tried this to fund their whole government based off of just printing money. And when you have that, you get to what's called hyperinflation. And let me see if I can find
$40 million note that you have.
Prop. Yes. So glad you brought it up. So for those who are watching at home, this I got in South Africa, and it is a $50 billion note from the Reserve Bank of South Africa or Zimbabwe, because they had really bad hyperinflation because they elected a Marxist after their civil war, who was also a dictator, and he didn't really understand how economics works, hence why he was a Marxist. And it ballooned up, and the country fell apart. Now they use the U.S. dollar. So some countries that are so dire economically just use the U.S. dollar as their currency. And so I remember an econ professor, he now works at the World Bank, and he talked about how he was studying dollars in which Southeast Asian country, I don't want to say the wrong one, but they use the US dollar. And he remembers he got like this most like wrinkled and like worn and soft, like, you know, really old, like you leave it in the washing machine, $20 bill. And he was like, use that. And then he like had this fresh dollars from America. And I said, could you get more in like an unbanked economy by handing out new money? Be like, hey, you're charging 20 for this, you know, whatever I'm buying, or $10 for a sandwich. I'll give you a new $10 bill. Can I get 2 sandwiches? Because then that's going to be more durable. And he said, I probably got ripped off on everything because I was the only American that didn't speak the language. But we were talking about Yeah, because it's always like you putting money in a bank versus putting it under your mattress kind of thing, right? And a lot of the world is not banked, and so that creates issues.
Well, that's a
But yeah,
big that's
yeah,
come up in the last, again, this is another thought, tangential thought that came up a big, like, in the last election or something, something that I didn't realize, or maybe I just took for granted, that there are a lot of people who don't have bank accounts, and
yeah, the unbanked
that becomes
population.
a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, because right, if you are unbanked and you have all your money under your mattress or in your house, and um, all of a sudden your house burns down or somebody breaks in, you have no money. Versus in the U.S., we have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation for banks, which insures your deposits. And fun fact, it's not funded by taxpayer dollars. So because they charge premium rates so to be FDIC insured as a bank, you have to follow certain rules of stability, and then they will insure depositors up to a certain amount. And then if the bank runs out of money, the FDIC comes in. And actually, there's a really cool 60 Minutes where they show what happens when a bank runs out of money, and the FDIC, they wait in the parking lot, and then like at 5:01 they all swarm in, and they're like, we're taking over the bank, which it's like illegal bank
Do they have
robbery.
cool, like,
um,
FBI like jackets that say FDIC on
I
the back?
I don't remember, but if they did, I would want an FDIC jacket. But they roll in and they're like, "We're taking over." It's kind of like in Monsters Inc. when the yellow suited monster people come in and help
Yeah.
when there's a crisis. But I was wondering, like, could somebody just show up and say, "I'm with the FDIC. We're taking over the bank." But
Why are
they
you
like
wearing a
it is
ski
actually
mask?
a lot. Why you're uh, yeah, don't rob banks. And but the FDIC helps out where yeah, so then they like have people who stand out in the lobby because like people all of a sudden like it hits the breaking news like local regional bank declares bankrupt or runs out of money, and people are like, I'm going to go in and get my money out before, because fractional reserve banking, right? Everyone does not have enough money. There's not enough cash in the bank to actually support everyone's withdrawals. But the FDIC helps ensure that, and the Fed is lender of last resort and make sure there's enough cash so you don't, because in the Great Depression, there were a lot of runs on banks, and that just created panic and accelerated the crisis. Again, supporting Keynes, right? Panic and animal spirits. Um, and so, yeah, but they come in and then they provide enough, and they're like nice people. And they're like, hello, welcome. It's like, you can withdraw your money if you'd like, but it will still be here tomorrow. And they're like trying to calm people. So yeah, the FDIC, and they're not funded by taxpayer dollars. They are backed up though. If they run out of money, the federal government will backstop their
Because
insurance.
they only
So
insure up to a
there's
certain amount, don't they?
Yes, yes. And so with Silicon Valley Bank in California, which went out of business a few years ago, and yeah, it was a big problem because like most companies, especially Silicon Valley companies, have deposits more than the minimum amount. And they're kind of out of luck. They say, sorry, the insurance only covers up to it's a six-figure amount. I can't remember exactly. I don't want to say it again and be wrong. And so anything above that is not insured. Now they did kind of like an ex gratia claim payment where the FDIC paid out everybody's deposits in that situation. Personally, I would have done a little bit of like a haircut, like we'll pay you back 90% because all the little people like you and I would be fine because our deposits would have been fully insured. But if you're a big sophisticated company, you underwriting your bank is actually something you should be doing, right? You have whole teams that are managing your investments and where you're keeping your cash, and you should be looking at which institutions are you depositing your money in. And a lot of people weren't, and it was like kind of, I guess, more obvious than I was not following the bank closely. But they should have known that, hey, we probably want to keep our money in this bank. But then it all kind of fizzled out. So, but yeah, these are kind of Keynes stuff. And I think, yeah, you and I should read the book 1929. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard good things. And then we can do a whole Great Depression Run on Banks podcast. Does that sound like a deal?
Yeah, maybe we can try to do a run on
Get
it.
the audiobook?
Yeah, maybe we can do like a live event, like everyone, let's run on this bank.
No, that's not. You don't run on.
Lived experience. It's the best way to learn, Charles.
Just no.
Get out in the
Force a run on the
streets
bank.
and do it.
Yeah. No. Yeah, we don't think we want to cause a run on the banks. We don't want to destabilize the whole financial system from our podcast.
Maybe.
Yeah, because maybe no.
No, okay, you're right.
Yeah. But yeah, so and yeah, but Keynes was not a communist, right? So I think that's an important thing because we talked a little bit about communism. He was kind of like via media. Like, how would you explain the middle way Anglicanism says that it's trying to do, and then we can kind of compare it to the economics.
Yeah. So the Church of England says that it's the middle way. It says it's the in between radical orthodoxy and Catholicism and liberal Protestantism. So it's like they see the Orthodox and the Catholic Church and the, I guess at that time, kind of more evangelical kind of things. They saw those as the extremes on the left and the right, and that they were in the middle of that. They took what was kind of good and true from both, and then cut out the excess of those things. So more like a moderate church theologically that they argued was the true apostolic church.
So, well, because virtue is the mean between two extremes. Although it's not
Well,
really
and it works it works in virtue, but it doesn't necessarily work in religion. It's either true or it's not.
It's a little more binary.
Yeah, well, and then you
yes.
get the people who like when you get like a radical religious person, right? You can the whole point of a religion of the book, right, is that there's a book that tells us what we're supposed to do. And so it's either an authentic interpretation or it's not an authentic interpretation, right? Like, so that's why like these radical religions like don't make any sense.
Yes, we don't like radicalism. And so, but yeah, so Keynes was against communism because he thought there was merit to private industry and innovation, and but he was like the state should have an involvement in making sure the economy works and helping stimulate aggregate demand.
It makes sense, I guess, in the European context that he kind of grew up in, right? Britain was still part of the UK at the time, and
Britain is still part of the UK. It's part of the EU. Well, the EU came about later. The EU came out in what when was the EU started? 2000, 99?
Whatever Europe is,
whatever European is,
because communism is definitely on the rise at the end of the 19th century. Very popular, and
yes, it was definitely in vogue. He would have grown up because, Marx was living in London, and so he would have been exposed to that belief. I think most European countries adopted Keynesianism and then degrees of socialism thereafter. Like, I don't think there's anyone who's less than Keynes in terms of government intervention in Europe. So
what so it's very clear and defined what Friedman's thought the role of the government should be. So what was Keynes's like rules for government involvement, or it's just like whatever?
Yes. He says it's important for the government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. So that was his philosophy, which is pretty,
it's not bad, but it's a little open-ended.
Yeah. It is a little open-ended. Well, because you talk about like public goods, like could the government run a car dealership better? No, but maybe somebody thinks they could. And he's like, it's not that they can do it better, but like things that aren't being done at all. Like, oh, no one's building railroads and we need railroads. So he'd be okay for the government getting involved building railroads. Or, oh, there's an economic recession. No one's spending money. It's the government's job to spend money to spur.
It'd be interesting to see what he would say about education, because I guess this is a broader question of how it started. Well, here in the United States, of like, was it public schools, or was it like when did the government get involved in public education? Or
yes, the government in the U.S. I think it was the 19th century. In the UK, it's complicated because there's public schools which are actually private schools. And because originally you'd be tutored, right, like by a private tutor for your household to teach your kids, and then they came up with these schools that like, no, you can get together, and they're called public schools because they were not in the house, but they were still private. And then there's state schools which are put on by the government, and then there's private schools which are kind of in the middle. So they're private schools, but they're not a part of like the first wave of public schools in the UK sense of the word. And so if someone in the UK says they went to public school, you have to say, all right, do you mean in the US sense or in the British sense? Because to them, public school is like the elite. you went to a public school. In the US, you'd say, no, I went to the Harvard Academy or something, right? Whenever it says academy in New England, I just
I
assume
didn't go to
something's
an
happening.
academy, but I did go to Fairfield College Preparatory School.
Preparatory school. Ooh, do you
Preparatory.
have a headmaster and had like a a owl on his shoulder? Um,
Just that 1 year.
just that 1 year when you were on study abroad at Hogwarts.
Though I did say that they did
uh,
say that my school, like architecturally, looked like Hogwarts. Beautiful Gothic building.
Beautiful graphic building. 1870, all schools were charitable or private institutions in England, and then there was the Elementary Education Act of 1870, and then secondary schools 1902, and then 1918 they abolished the fees for elementary schools. So
This is interesting because I mean, this is not much to do with what we were talking about, but like, I don't know if I guess, but I'm like a big fan of school choice, and kind of it. One, I think it gives people who want to go to a better school to go, but two, I also think it creates like competition in school so that public schools actually get better, and then families can afford to go to a private school, and then it's more of like an equal choice of like where do we educate, because right now it's like some towns in Connecticut have really excellent public education, and it's the way they allocate taxes and everything in their town, and so private schools don't really do well in those because the public schools are so great and they're free. And then there are other towns where the public schools are so bad, but those families can't afford to send a child somewhere else. And so I think it creates a little bit more of an even playing field from town wise, but also because it like forces you to make your schools better. Otherwise you lose that money. And then it makes private schools more affordable and that they can grow, and we can actually pay teachers a competitive rate. And so government involvement in education is something that I think now more and more parents are even becoming skeptical of like curriculums and such. So, but maybe that's just my own little personal.
capitalism, it breeds, to your point, the best. If you have a monopoly like the post office, which again, a big fan, mail lots of letters, go to the Postal Service Museum, but practically, like, would you rather go to the Apple Store or the post office to deal with a matter of like buying something? It's like, well, the Apple Store, it's much more fun and much more glossy, and it's because there's competition. Because you could go to Samsung, you could go to Motorola, you could go to the Verizon store, right?
Well,
And
doesn't the
they
government
have
actually,
to,
the post
yeah.
office has like what Amazon, what UPS, Amazon, and FedEx can actually like do? Like they can't use your mailbox.
Yes, they can't. So that's right, because the Postal Service is a state-owned enterprise through the Postal Reform Act of 1975, I think, or it was in the 70s under Nixon. They reformed the post office, or attempted to. And it's a monopoly, so it's illegal for anyone to do first-class mail other than the post office, and it's also, yeah, illegal for anyone else to use your mailbox other than the post office. And so UPS and FedEx and Amazon get around that by delivering to your porch, and they can't deliver documents unless they're extremely urgent. In which case, that's why when you mail documents or you ship documents via FedEx, on the cardboard it says extremely urgent. Um, but also, like, they don't opt for, all their times are much quicker than the postal service. But yeah, so the post office has a state mandated monopoly, so the barrier to entry is infinitely high. So they don't have to improve because, I mean, they're guaranteed to get the first class mail, and then eventually people say we don't want this or we don't want to get this. And I think, yeah, school choice is the same thing. If you have a mandated monopoly and no one's allowed to go to any other school, then if they give you the best education or the worst education, they're still giving you they're still okay. And so creating competition, it forces, yes, a school to be competing and to be relevant, and it also to compete among teachers, right? Like the teachers are going to go where they're higher paid, and so therefore the schools are going to make sure they give good pay and benefits to their teachers versus like a top down, like, oh, we've mandated that our teachers are going to make this much regardless of their outcome or the student experience. And so I think school choice is good. Yeah, and to your point, like you have this money that's attached to a student from the state. If you go to a public school and they like count how many students there are, and like, all right, well, you have 500 students, you get $5,000 a student, so therefore this is your budget from the state. you choose to go to a private school, that money vanishes. And so you have places where the public schools are really bad, and these people can't take advantage. Like the barrier to go to a private school is so much higher. I do wonder though, will it create the same issues in higher ed, right? Where with school choice, Thomas Sowell said, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs in
Mm.
economics. And so there's not like, oh, we fixed it, magic bullet, no problems. Because if we say, all right, now you have a $5,000, government check that wherever you go to school, they will get $5,000 of state funding. So if a school in town used to charge $5,000 a head, now everybody has $5,000. They can raise their prices because there are certain people who are willing to spend at least $5,000 of their own cash, and then they will come with another $5,000 from the government, so it can increase prices. Does that make sense? Right? Because again, you have more supply chasing the same amount of demand.
Well,
And
yeah.
so I'm just trying to think of like how to manage that because I don't think the existing model is great either. I'm not saying like, oh, everything's fine, but it's like, how do we balance those two out? Maybe we can
No,
involve not at all in higher
well, it's
education.
definitely it's
Higher
something I
education.
said
Yeah.
is like if school choice gets passed in Connecticut, which I don't think I'm not hopeful that it will anytime soon, but I've always said, well, when school choice passes, like one of the first things we can do is like raise tuition.
Yes. See, look
Um,
at that. You're already responding to incentives. So
well, no, and again, but also I said, but at the same time, we also have a responsibility to increase scholarships and
yes.
funding in
Yeah.
the school, like getting it out ahead of that because you want to have the people who can, like the school choice tax incentive becomes a scholarship in of its sense, in and of itself. Um, but you also still want to be able to keep it affordable enough so that even those who can afford it, even with the tax credit, can still come. So it is
Yes.
like a
Yeah.
balancing act in a certain respect.
No, it is. And I think that's a good point. That's, I think, what a lot of schools, like even in DC, like one of our friends went to a school that was like, I don't know, $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year or something, which was ridiculous. When I think about, I went to free high school and he and I ended up at the same college, right? And so, um, but they at the same time they made there was a Catholic school a goal of in having scholarships and encouraging people from who couldn't afford that amount to still be able to go, and so they had a certain amount set aside. I think that's out of like Christian charity, right? Like, maybe you set aside like 10% of our students are coming scholarship, and we're going to make sure that we fundraise, we get donors, we're subsidized by the other tuition to get that because you want to have those people have access to other education who
Yeah,
may
that's
not be able
exactly
to
what
do so.
my high school did. It when I went there, tuition was just under 20. Now it's over 20.
$20,000 a year
Yeah,
for
I
high
think it was
school.
18 when I was there, and but like lots of scholarships. And if you received a certain amount of financial aid, there was like a lot of engagement that had to be done for donors and for the scholarship fund so that people can come. And but that was also a big priority of the school is like making people who are from poor families or different, particularly the cities, um, they could come to prep and have a better opportunity. So it was definitely a huge part. I mean, we were all kind of aware of it, and also like it was a school that where like I think barely anyone paid the full
The full
tuition
student
because
price.
the
Yeah.
financial aid was well funded and well stocked. And that was another thing that the school just did was a huge campaign to raise money for the fund for scholarships.
Yeah. See, look at that's good. So look at this. The community provides, and I think that's at the best what like the church does as a community is it finds it is aware of a need and people who need help and it supports them.
Yeah, but to relate this back to
And so
Keynes, maybe kind of loosely, is like again, yeah, this is where I hesitate on his definition of government involvement because I think education seems like it's something where like people are already doing it and they can do it a little bit better securely. I don't know the solution. Like, I don't think we should. I mean, I think everyone should just go to Catholic school. And like
that's probably Leibniz's solution.
we run
So
schools, hospitals, like we do. We're like so good at it. At least we were when we had the personnel. Um, but yeah, so like I don't know because I like Friedman better in the sense because it's very specific. Um,
Friedman said. Government has three primary functions: provide for the military, defense of the nation, enforce contracts between individuals. It should protect citizens from crimes against themselves or their property. When government, in pursuit of good intention, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the costs come in inefficiency, lack of motivation, and loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player. And so, and I think Keynes and him, there's a difference, but I don't think Keynes is like, oh, government should be the puppet master and planning the whole economy. That's very much a socialist.
Yeah, they're not polar
view.
opposites. There's a lot. They kind of a
Spectrum.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So, and I think also Keynes and Hayek, so F.A. Hayek, Friedrich August von Hayek, who we can do another episode on him. He's the big Austrian thinker, him and Ludwig von Mises. Hayek and Keynes were together in England for some time, and they actually got along very chummily. Like they disagreed on stuff because the Austrian school is very libertarian, very similar to the Chicago school of thought. But like Keynes, I'll give him a lot of credit for being very respectful. Like I don't think Keynes is a villain, right? And I don't think he's entirely wrong. I just don't know if it's the best outcome. And again, I think there's problems with a lot of what he tries to accomplish, especially if that becomes like it's sort of like if like it's a rental car, right? Like if you have insurance on the rental car, you may drive it a little bit more dangerously, right? And so if governments know we are going to have the government come in to restart the economy, they may take more risks, and then therefore force for bailouts and interventions and other things. And so, yeah, but Keynes is important to acknowledge. And we also talked about, this is a fun one, stickiness of prices and wages. So,
Gross.
which is like, it's such an econ word. Sticky?
Gross is an econ word too.
Well, yes, gross domestic product. Look at this. Gross stickiness. That's going to be a new econ buzzword. Because he talked about how weight in an economic and inflationary environment, prices and wages are sticky, meaning it's hard to increase prices. Like on a gas station, it's very easy, right? You have the gas station prices written in lights, and like I don't know if there's somebody who hits a button or if there's like a pulse that's sent out and they all change it.
That.
Some guy, pushes a button, whatever it is, and changes the price. But in a lot of places, particularly before that system, like in a grocery store, you have all these little stickers on shelves, right? And so he was talking about how inflation takes a while to fully, it's not like an instantaneous thing. And that because you have to update all the stickers. And so there's a natural delay. You also have existing contracts, right? Like if I agree, if I'm a grocery store to buy cans of green beans from you for 12 cents a can for a year, if all of a sudden it costs 24 cents, I have a contract that I only have to pay 12 cents to buy it, right? And so there's kind of that delay. And similarly with wages, right? It's not like every day they're like, actually, you're role and you are worth this much, so we're going to pay you more this week. Oh, actually it's worth less. There's more people who graduated with that degree, we're going to charge you less. Like your wages are adjusted maybe annually, right? And so that's what can cause some delays for economics. So you'd say the prices and wages are sticky, which is why inflation, we dumped $4 trillion during COVID, and we didn't get inflation the next day, but we didn't get it that long after, once that money started working its way through the economy and started pushing up those things. So, yeah.
I think I learned something today.
You think you learned something today? Yeah. Well, price tag invention, that's another thing that's quite consequential in economic history, because price tags used to not be as ubiquitous as they are. And so like they would size you up. You walk in wearing your Vineyard Vines, when you want to buy a wooden dowel, it's going to be a little more, right, than if you come in and
it's like that scene in Pretty Woman.
I have not seen the movie, but I have seen from The Office. Yes. I would like the crystal wizard, please.
Big mistake. Huge.
Yes, but now price tags are very clear. But the same, like, if you go to luxury stores, they still don't have price tags. And that's where, was it Rockefeller was with a journalist and they were going in some very fancy store. And he's like, none of these have price tags. And he said, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. So, like even Rolex and Omega used to not put their prices by their watches, and you had to, like, on their websites or in the stores. And so generally, if I go to a store and there's no price tag, I know I am not buying anything here. I will just
looking,
look
no
and not
thanks.
touch. Exactly. So, well, I think, yeah, this has been a good discussion about Keynes, right? So we've talked about the
So
kind of industry. Hopefully somebody learned
we're not
something.
as big as
I don't know any
advocates, but
people.
we're not against him completely.
We're not. We're,
We're taking the middle road on Keynes.
we're taking the middle road on the middle road. Yes, I think if I could make one economist, the supreme, I would put Friedman up there. But Keynes, I acknowledge his significance, and I think we'll talk about Marx too. And I think Marx, again, there's a lot of significance in how he identifies problems and things, but his solutions, Marx's solutions are dangerous. Keynes's, I think, are not as productive as allowing the free market to do its thing. But it's important to recognize what Keynes did, and we all live in Keynes's world. And so we have the World Bank, we have GDP, we have the IMF, in large part due to Keynes and his thinking as a British economist.
Like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you're supposed to do with these things. Until next week, work hard and pray harder.